I'm going to pretend that we just started because we just did that. So welcome everyone to the Storytelling Workshop Showcase. Woohoo! Let's hear it. Yay! Um, yes. Thank you again. Thank you for coming out, for supporting your friends, your family, whoever is there. Thank you, Suzanne, for bringing a whole bottle. Oh, I thought that was like a wine bottle. For some reason, from this angle, yeah, just go ahead and drink from it again. The way you were drinking, it looked like, yeah, just drink the whole bottle. I'm glad it's not. But welcome. I'm so happy you're here. We have 8 storytellers tonight. And just to give a little context of what is happening and what you're kind of in for tonight, is presumably your friends, your family, or maybe complete strangers, have taken a 5-week storytelling workshop in which we've basically gone through a process of kind of plumbing our lives for stories. Like, what are the stories that we have inside of us, either stories that we have been wanting to work on, or maybe we are reminded by something that happened in the class and exercise, like in creativity and kind of connecting with our own memories and finding our stories, developing those stories, and then finally telling those stories. So tonight is kind of a graduation of sorts, sort of a culmination of that experience where everyone is telling and sharing those stories publicly, which is, well, let's be honest, it's a little exciting, a little scary for them. So I appreciate your support, your encouragement, and your just being here to be a part of this show. We also have a way of encouraging you to participate in the show tonight. So during the show, in between the stories, I'm encouraging the audience to submit stories of your own in the chat, and then I could kind of read those stories in between the storytellers. And the theme of the show tonight is sight and insight. So the prompt that I have for tonight is the following. What is an insight that you have gained this year about yourself or someone else? So an insight that you have gained this year about yourself or about someone else. So if that strikes a chord with you at any way, at any time, it doesn't have to be right now, it could be later on. Think about something that maybe you've learned or thought about or grown in some capacity through this past year. And please put it in the chat. I will read them kind of in between the storytellers. So that's effectively what we're going to be doing tonight. I'm going to do a quick story of my own that's sort of on the topic that I thought of today. Today has been a very unusual day for me. My son is 15 years old, and his year has been terrible. I would say terrible. He'd say terrible. You know, he's a 15-year-old. He's a freshman in high school, so this is the year where he's supposed to be pulling away and distancing himself. And of course, through the situation that we're all in, he's been sort of locked inside. And we found an activity, though, that was sort of socially distant activity that he could do. And starting in September, he started on a crew team, a rowing crew team with Pacific Rowing Club here in San Francisco. And so 5 days a week, he has been rowing. And today was kind of an amazing, magical day because for the first time, he had a regatta, like an actual race thing that happened today. And but the thing that wasn't so good is that it was at 5 in the morning. So it's been a very long day for me. I've been up since just before 5 o'clock for the regatta. But the theme of the show tonight is sight and insight. And I think when I kind of think back where we were a year ago from right now, the insight that I have about my own child and my own family is a year ago he was graduating from 8th grade. And he was so down and he was so sad for all of the things that he lost and that he wasn't going to be able to have with his friends, and finishing his last year of 9 years at a school that he'd been at since he was a kindergartner. And the year that we've now experienced, and him, the joy that he experienced today, rowing and cheering and being with friends and feeling so happy. And I feel like even though he experienced this great sadness, and we all kind of experienced it with him, to see and experience the joy of that and the change in him from then to now is so satisfying and delightful to me as a parent. So thank you. That's a little insight that I've gained from this past year. Thank you, Anita. Yeah, I'm going to now replace the spotlight and please welcome your first storyteller for the evening, Helena True. Hey.
Woo! Thank you. It was a warm summer afternoon in New Hampshire. I was hanging on a wood rail fence with my dad, and I'm 9, so it's kind of like we're cowboys. We're waiting, and we are waiting. We're waiting for my older sister to finish doing whatever she's doing with her rented horse. She loved horses. She still does. But she was an incredibly unhappy child. And perhaps this was the result of being adopted in haste as a replacement baby for a first adopted baby who died in crib death. Or perhaps it's just a temperamental mismatch. In any event, her unhappiness found its best of fleeting relief in the terrorizing of me. The mistreatment was relentless. A favorite pastime was chasing me with a dinner knife. We had very slippery floor, and so it was quite a scramble to my room where I would slam the door and hold the button on the doorknob in, because the same kind of knife could be used to click the lock. So I had to make sure I held that in. If I was wearing socks, I would curse my socks as the door would get pushed and I would be slipping. Regardless, the door would get gouged and gouged and gouged with stabs of the knife. It's just how it was, and there were no consequences. And it was a culture that I adapted to. So there we are waiting, cowboy and maybe my dad, the sheriff. Here's my opportunity to kind of ask for some kind of cowboy justice. And so I say, Dad, you know how mad the mayor makes me sometimes. It's so bad. What if one time I let her have it and I just let go, punch her? And he says, no, that's not okay. So this is where the cowboy filter disintegrates and there's no heroes. A bumbling sheriff, a despairing tomboy. And 22 years later, I'm tormenting myself. I'm pursuing a second undergraduate degree in structural engineering. I'm going to City College, which sits atop a lovely, lovely, steep hill park called St. Nicholas. And it's all steps from City College through the park down to the subway. Now, this is midterms and it's daylight savings has just happened. I'm exhausted from this rigorous program. And I want to take a shortcut home because I'm so tired. So I decide I'm going to go through the park, even though it's almost nighttime. So I start down the steps and I see when I'm a third of the way down that there's 3 girls. They're young, they're teens, but they see me and they are talking about me. And I know this is not good. So what am I going to do? It feels like fate and a choice at the same time. I don't want to walk back up the hill because I'm exhausted and I've never been mugged. So I accept my fate and make my choice, and I go right on down the steps to meet them at the bottom of the steps where they block my way. The one in the center, she says, where are you going? And I mumble, home. And bang! She sucker punches me right in the face. And I've never been punched in the face until then. And so as my head is kind of feels like in slow motion going back, the only thing I'm thinking is, wow, this is just what I'm learning in biology. This is the miracle of the adrenaline response. This is fight, this is flight, it's the whole thing. And I can feel it go into every cell in my body in less than an instant, and I feel like a superhero. That's what I'm thinking at the time. But in reflection, I'm thinking about this one time my sister was chasing me with the dinner knife, and I scrambled and ran toward my room. But this time, instead of going into my room, I went into her room and locked the door. And boy, did that piss her off. So there I am, my head reverberating from my first received punch. And I'm not thinking. I'm looking at the girl in the center who hit me. And I hit this one over here on the left. And everybody was so surprised, especially me. And boy, did it feel good. It felt great. In fact, I've referred to this as one of my top 10 experiences. So I finally got mugged, and it really felt good to fight back. Thank you.
Give it up for Helena True. Yes.
Awesome.
Remember the prompt. I'm inviting all of you to answer if you want. The question is an insight that you've gained this year about yourself or someone else. And Michael said that he'd learned that being locked inside for a year isn't terribly detrimental to my psyche. Perhaps that's due to Stockholm Syndrome. That's Stockholm Syndrome. Boom. And welcome to the stage, your next storyteller, Lara Nuer. Woo!
Thank you. All right. I am a recovering perfectionist. I was born in Paris in 1967 out of wedlock. And so for the first couple of years, it was my mom and I against the world. We lived in this tiny apartment in Paris, one of those apartments where there's no elevator on the 4th floor. And it was a very small room that had a kitchen attached to it and just one bed where she and I slept together, and that also served as the couch. In our room walks in, and in our life walks in, Sam. Sam is a Jewish Egyptian man, 16 years younger than my mom. And he has soft brown skin. And he's from Egypt, but my mom, she has freckles. She's a Jewish woman from Eastern European descent. But they say opposites attract, and they fall in love. And so one day I'm sat down on the bed, the couch, the center place of this apartment, to have a serious conversation where Sam tells me, you're going to come and move to Montreal, and we're all going to be a family, because he was a student in engineering in Montreal. And he says, is there something special that you would like when you move to Montreal? And I'm thinking, I'd like a cat. And he says, I promise. And I think, I get a dad, I get a cat, deal, I'm in, let's go to Montreal. And we moved to Montreal. And you know, in Canada, everything is huge. The cars are the size of our kitchen in our little Parisian apartment. The house we move in, I have my own room with my own bed, and there's a lawn. Oh my goodness, the sky's the limit. And all of my parents' friends, they're my dad's age. They're all students at the University of Montreal. So I'm the only little girl, that's 4. And so everybody adores me. I'm the special little kid that they all get to babysit. And I got a cat. He kept his promise. There's just one thing missing. I'd really love a brother or a sister. And in my mind, it's like a toy that would all of a sudden be my age and my size, and that would walk and talk and play with me. I'm very excited about this idea. So one day when I'm 5, my mom and now adopted dad, my mom and my dad take me to the room of the house where we have serious conversations. And that's the laundry room in the basement. And they tell me, there is a little brother or a little sister that is growing in your mommy's tummy. But it's a secret. do you think you can keep it as a secret and not tell anybody? And I'm so excited that I'm going to get my talking toy. And I'm feeling so grown up that I'm entrusted with the secret. Of course, I'm not going to tell anybody. Of course, I'm going to keep that promise. And so we then proceed to continue to live our life. And soon enough, I find myself in a car with all of my parents' friends and without my parents. And it's this big Chevrolet, and I'm sitting in the back seat, and there's one adult next to me and another adult next to me. And I'm just thinking, it's so important that I don't spill the beans. My parents are not here. How do I keep the secret? And a plan forms in my mind. I know what I'm going to do. And I proceed to say, there is a secret in my mommy's tummy, and you cannot ask me what it is because I won't tell you. And I'm so proud of myself, how I dodged that bullet. That evening, I am called to the laundry room for a serious conversation. And I am told, Lara, you broke your promise. And so you're going to get a spanking. Remember, this is 1972. Parenting by spanking is a thing. And you're 5. So it's going to be butt naked, and you're going to count out loud each slap. And here I am on my dad's lap, butt naked, and I am not liking that brown skin. Whack comes slap number 1, and I have to say 1. It hurts on my butt, but what hurts more is that it's unfair. Whack number 2, and I say it out loud, and it burns on my butt cheeks. But what really burns is the humiliation. Why do I have to say the number out loud as if I'm admitting guilt when I'm not guilty? By the 5th slap, I've decided they're not going to see me cry. I'm going to hold it all in, and I'm never going to let this happen again. I think that's the day that I lost my spontaneity. I think that's the day that I lost my bubbly, free spirit where sky was the limit. Many years later, my dad and I revisited this event. We were actually doing work together on childhood and how it affects us. And he was mortified and full of regret. And he apologized, and he talked about how he was 22 years old. He wasn't a mature dad yet. And spanking was done everywhere. And if he could turn the wheels of time back, he would not do that again. And I thought, if he can apologize, then I can reclaim my bubbly, adventurous self who once knew how to paint outside the box. I am a recovering perfectionist. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara Nuer. Thank you for sharing that, for telling that, and let's welcome to the show our next storyteller, my good friend Victor Lopez. Woohoo! There.
She told me to hit it right between the eyes, or the animal would suffer. My grandmother told me this as we were stalking a rabbit in Mexico outside her hometown, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to kill anything that cute. I was 12 years old and I had no idea why she was teaching this to me. She looked at me and said, you have to do this. You have to learn where your food comes from. You have to learn how to make your food. I already know how to cook, Grandma. You taught me that last year and the year before. And she replied, cooking is not the same as making your food. I'm not going to do it, I told her. Fine, I'll do it for you. And so she takes a rock out of her pocket. She puts it in the leather slingshot. She retracts the elastic and lets it fly across the sky. The rock hits the rabbit upside the head and it starts to tremble. She walks over to it. She thanks it for a sacrifice, and then she puts it out of its misery. I may have cried a little at that moment, but I still was in complete disbelief. Why was she teaching me this? Of all the things she could have taught me, she was a makeshift midwife in her hometown. She was a town healer. She was a weaver. She knew how to fish. She knew how to do everything in the garden and on the farm. Why was she teaching me how to kill? She held the rabbit up by the back legs and expected me to walk over to it. I looked at her and I said, I'm not going to eat it. I don't want to do it. You have to learn, she told me. I'm not going to eat it, I repeated. You must clean this animal and do it yourself, she told me. I said, no. So she did it herself. She incised around the animal's ankles and once around the neck, and she removed the fur like you would remove a sock from a foot. She then finished the animal off in process. We wrapped it up. We wrapped the fur separately. And she looked at me and told me, if you're not going to eat it, then we go to town and you trade it for something you will eat. And so we got on the bus. We got off at the open air market. And here I am, a 12-year-old boy walking around with an animal carcass trying to sell it. I looked at all the farmers that were there sitting on their tarps, and no one wanted this rabbit. Everyone wanted a fish or chicken or mangoes or limes or anything else, guavas maybe. None of the indigenous people wanted a rabbit. The rabbits here were meant to be eaten by the Americans or the French who had settled in settlements nearby. No one here wanted it. Finally, we walked by a butcher shop and my grandmother pointed me to go in. We walk in and I asked the counter, do you want to buy this rabbit? And she said, how old is it? And I said, under 30 minutes. And she asked me, did you clean it yourself? I said, no, my grandma did. And so she looks at the animal and she takes it from me. You have 25 pesos of credit for the store. Take whatever you need. And so we did. My grandmother filled her basket with whatever she needed, and the credit that was left over, I had about a small box of cornflakes. We took everything home. She made dinner for everyone. Everyone ate. And I sat at the table across from her with my bowl of cornflakes just sitting there. I still had no appetite. I couldn't possibly eat anything after that day. And she looked pleased. She was all of 4'10", and she looked across the table at me and looked so big. I remember her so fondly. And then she said, next year, when your parents send you here for the summer, I teach you how to make tamales. And I reluctantly said yes. Okay. And I say reluctantly because if you have never made tamales from scratch before, it is a 3 to 4 day process. You take the dried corn off the cob and you have to process it into something edible. It's a process called nixtamalization, where you have to boil it once, clean off the husk, you boil it again, you separate it, you mill it, you make the sauces, you make the fillings, you soak the wrappers, and then you put it all together. And finally, a few days later, you serve it to your family. Tamales are literally a labor of love. But that summer in Mexico never came. My grandfather had gotten a little sicker. And because it was too much for my grandmother to deal with, we sent for them. And they joined us here in San Francisco. I was in charge of showing my grandmother where to get food, how to show her where the pharmacy was. Everything she needed was going to go through me. One day she looked at Grandpa and she said, your grandpa looks a little homesick. Let's make him something to eat. Something that reminds him of home. And so I showed her how to take the bus to the market. We got on, I showed her where to get off. And finally we enter the store and we collect everything we need. Grandmother looked a little bit out of place. She didn't know where to get anything, but I was quick to show her where everything was. And finally she said, we need a chicken. And so I walked her to the back where all the chickens were in the refrigerator. And she paused and didn't say anything. She just stared at all the chickens that were all wrapped in plastic. They were in rows and rows and rows, and she looked at me. And she asked me, Mijo, my son, which one of these is the best? And I didn't understand what she was asking me. And so I said, Grandma, they're all the same. They just cost a little bit different, or they might weigh it different, but they're all the same. and she yelled at me, "They're never the same." And she picked the one that was closest to her, threw it in her basket, and started walking towards the front of the store. I followed her, we paid, and with one of the extra dollars she had, she bought a scratcher because it reminded her of Mexico. They had those there too. We took everything home, we laid it out in front of the table, and she carefully scratched the metal fluff off of the cardboard with the scratcher. She kept staring at it, and I didn't know what she was doing. She looked a little homesick herself, and she had a tear in her eye, but she was scratching it ever so carefully. I didn't really realize. She slowly pushed the scratcher across the table and looked at me and said, "Mijo, I don't read English, but did we win?" And I carefully studied it, and I said, "No, Grandma, I don't think we did." And we sat there for a few more minutes, just in complete silence. I had no idea what to do, but I knew one thing, that my grandma was out of place. She was homesick herself. She was in a foreign country, and here I am, a 13-year-old boy, showing her how to do everything, where once it was her job to show me everything. The only thing I knew to say to her was, I remembered my promise from the year before. And I said, "Grandma, do you still want to show me how to make tamales?" And she said, yes. And she smiled a little bit and agreed. And that summer, we made 4 different types of tamales. It was all from scratch, 3 days each time, and 4 different sauces. And we stuffed our families full of tamales as much as we could. And I remember every minute fondly. And ever since that summer, every time I make tamales, I invite friends over. I show them how to make them. I tell them about my grandmother, who she was, and it shows them where I came from. Thank you.
Victor Lopez, everyone.
Yeah, Victor.
So please welcome to the stage, Annie Wong. Woohoo!
So, growing up in Texas, I was surrounded by like a lot of symbols of worship. Lots of Jesus paintings, lots of crosses, mega churches. My parents didn't raise me with any particular religion because they weren't really religious, and it just wasn't really a thing for our family. But seeing all of these symbols made me feel like everyone else was like part of this club that I wasn't invited to, where all of the members kept on referring to him with a capital H, and that he would save you. And I was like, okay, but like, who is he? I've never met him. The closest I've ever gotten to this feeling of connection to a higher power is through art. So for example, when I was 16 years old, I was in love with Elliott Smith. Elliott Smith was a singer-songwriter who grew up in Texas like me, and he wrote these songs that just dripped with loneliness and a quiet anger, that when I would listen to his music, it would seep in through my ears and move through my body like an emotional filtration system. And I drew a really girly portrait of him, playing guitar, surrounded by stars with his lyrics in the sky. And instead of like paintings of Jesus, I had this portrait of Elliott hanging up on my bedroom wall. And I derived great comfort looking up at it. So I was brimming with excitement when I finally got the chance to meet him after a show at Waterloo Records in Austin. I brought the drawing for him to sign, and I also made a copy to give him as an offering. He signed the original drawing, "To Annie, Heart Elliott." And I was like, that's my name, next to a heart, next to his name. And I handed him the duplicate, and he asked me how I would like it signed. And what I wanted to say was, oh no, This is for you, heavenly being. Thank you for making this beautiful art that helped me move through my own pain. I know I'm only 16 and you're 29, but we both grew up as misfits in Texas, so let's run away and be sad together. But all that my teenage brain could muster up was, this is for you. And he took it and looked at it kind of confused, and he said, oh, okay, thanks. And continued signing autographs. So I saw Elliot again a few years later at Bottom of the Hill in San Francisco. But on that night, this heavenly being looked broken. It's not a secret that Elliot struggled with mental health and addiction, because he's a human being just like the rest of us. But seeing him that way really changed the way I felt about hero worship. That is until many, many years later, when I had the opportunity to meet another creative hero of mine, Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee freaking Herman. Paul's work gave me permission to be playful, zany, and fun, and a little bit obnoxious. And I just really wanted Paul to see that the aesthetics and philosophy of Pee Wee's Playhouse is embedded in the DNA of some of the cartoons that I make today. So the night before I was going to see him, I recreated this piece of artwork that he had actually reposted on the internet a while before. And it was this pink, bug-eyed, screaming ice cream cone made out of clay and an actual varnished ice cream cone. And I attached this gold chain around this ridiculous looking thing, and I wore it as a necklace. So when it was my turn in the meet and greet line, I walked up to Paul and he stared down at my chest and he said, "That's a very interesting necklace. Wait, I know that ice cream. You didn't make that, did you?" And I said, "I did." And then he told me I was very talented and he gave me a hug. And then I basically died because I had just been knighted by the Queen. Paul's recognition of my work sent my spirit out of my body and up into the heavens. And I was on cloud nine for the rest of that night and for several days after that. Having been seen by this greater creator made me feel like I could do anything. I could take over the world. But then 2 weeks later, the world shut down because of the global pandemic. And nobody was going to be executing any plans for world domination, because we're all susceptible to panic, illness, and grief. So where do I turn to now for comfort? Who's the capitalized pronoun that's going to save me now? Well, I had a bodily experience recently that pointed me in the right direction. I once again saw myself in someone else's art. And this time it was in the movie Minari, which is written and directed by Lee Isaac Chung. So the movie Minari is about a Korean family pursuing the American dream, trying to make a life for themselves on a farm in rural Arkansas. And in this movie, I witnessed Asian family dynamics that echoed my own family's. I saw Southern religious worship stuff that reminded me of my experience growing up in Texas. And while I didn't need this movie to save me necessarily, the fact that it was getting a lot of prestigious award show attention validated my unseen and unspoken of formative years. So when I found out after that this piece of art was ineligible from competing for the Best Picture category at the Golden Globe Awards, because it's primarily in Korean, not English, my logical language brain was like, yep, of course this would happen. The world is not fair. I know this already. but my emotional heart center was ripped apart. And this rumbling in my chest that I was feeling bubbled up and over into a sloppy mess of tears streaming from my face. Because that feeling of not being a part of this club that everyone else seemed to be invited to came flooding back. So lately, I've been making these little self-portrait sculptures. The first one is me standing tall, wearing a mustard yellow Wonder Woman sweatshirt. The second one I made is of me leaning on an ox, wearing a cowboy hat and a cowboy shirt with red dragons on it. And I'm also wearing a Jade Buddha bolo tie. And the third one I've made is of me wearing my apron covered in 10 years worth of paint projects, my hands clasped over my heart. And to me, they're more than just these sculptures. They're kind of like these little trophies that I've made to celebrate different parts of my story. I derive great comfort giving shape to them and applying color to them, and then assembling them all together on my shelf like a tiny army of me. Because I realized that if I live in a world that repeatedly denies my family's belonging, my visibility, and my humanity, then I need to be the one to see myself and belong to myself. I'm existing to be the person I wish I could have seen as a kid. And while I think it's totally okay to look for spiritual inspiration in a greater creator or in someone larger than life, I think it's also okay to recognize that we're all creators too, and that maybe it's possible to find inspiration in our own little stories, in our own little lives. And while maybe I won't go so far as to call it self-worship, I am okay with calling it self-love. Thank you.
Annie Wong, everyone. All right, let us keep the stories coming, and please welcome to the stage my old friend and my new student, Marc Toscano. Woohoo!
I'm never getting out of this building. No, seriously, I'm never getting out of this building. That is my only thought while I'm sitting alone underneath a buzzing, flickering fluorescent tube. It's the only broken tube in an overly white, windowless, sterile government building. My seat has the number 1 on it. I was told to sit there and wait until I am called. In front of me are 5 stations. Each station has multiple computer screens, an armed man with black paramilitary uniform, and a scary piece of medical-looking equipment. I'm not sure how long I've been sitting here. Have I been here for 20 minutes or 3 hours? No one is talking, no phones have rung, there is no activity whatsoever. Only the blinking fluorescent tube above me. Toscano! I walked the 30 yards past 3 rows of empty numbered chairs back towards the security area, where I was frisked and required to surrender my backpack and phone. No photography or recording devices are allowed in the building. There are signs stating that fact everywhere. All of the contents of my backpack have been laid out by the X-ray machine and organized by size. The man in black has a puzzled look on his face as he flips through my madman's notebook containing pages and pages of Cartesian coordinates and indecipherable scribbles and to-do lists. Excuse me, sir. Those are my work notes. I could get fired because you're reading them. He looks up with no expression and tells me to go to station 1. He continues reading. Station 1 was directly in front of chair number 1. This is a joke, right? They're messing with me, right? As I walk back, I wonder what will happen if he reads the explosion should be 2 seconds earlier and bigger. Oh, and make sure a big rock hits the supervillain in the face. I give the man in black at station number 1 over 50 pages of documents. I am photographed, fingerprinted, tips, fingers, thumb, full handprints. The scary piece of medical equipment is for the retinal scan. He meticulously goes through all of my documents, circling things, making notes, occasionally looking up at his screen, back at the notes, and then back up at the screen again. The only dialogue is one-sided. I said, loosen your arm. Don't blink or we have to do it again. Loosen your arm. How long have I been in here? I am the only civilian in the place. There's no other talking. No one's typing. There's no phones ringing. Okay, I've accepted the fact that I'm never getting out of this building. So I guess the question now is, am I being recruited or abducted? Is the New World Order about to take place? They want to send me to the government bunker early to get me settled in? Or will I be sent to the secret Chinese moon base? Am I going to have to learn Mandarin? If I had known my Master of Arts would only qualify me to serve drinks to the genetically perfect in the orange quadrant, I would have gone to trade school. Whatever the scenario may be, will they be sending just me or just the parts of me? When did getting a work visa get so complicated? You can go now. What's that? I'm sorry, you can go now. We're done here. Gather your things, and remember, no photographs or video of the building. You can leave. Again, I think, when did getting a work visa get so complicated? A few weeks later, I received my immigration biometrics card, which is now required to work in the European Union. It's the new thing. It's better. It works better than a passport. You can go anywhere now and work anywhere in the EU. And don't forget to keep it on your person at all times. The Barbie pink and Prince purple lettered chipped card has my name, thumbprint, and my picture. I found out that the card did absolutely nothing when I was denied entry into France. You couldn't use it to cross the border. The card didn't speed you through customs or immigration. It wasn't even a valid form of ID. The program had been canceled. And even though the program had been canceled, all the Western governments now have everything they need to know about me. I'm sitting alone in an overly white, windowless room. Armed men in black paramilitary uniforms from both sides of the border are trying to determine whether I should be arrested for trying to cross the border illegally, or if the card is or was a real thing, because neither have seen one before. I'm never getting out of this building. I'm never getting out, am I? Thank you.
Marc Toscano, give it up. Please welcome to the stage your next storyteller, Robin Meyerowitz. Woo-hoo!
The truth always comes out, so don't lie to me. This is something that my mother told me my entire childhood growing up. And I was the oldest of 4 kids, and my parents were really strict with me. I wasn't allowed to do a lot. I wasn't allowed to go to concerts. I didn't get to go see Blue Lagoon or Endless Love or any Brooke Shields movie. And I would get so frustrated that I wasn't able to go out with my friends that I would say to my mom, I'm just not going to tell you. I'm going to do it and not tell you. And she would say, the truth comes out. Don't do that. And so I didn't. I'm a lousy liar. But I did start to wonder, what if you just don't say anything? What if it's a lie of omission and you say nothing? Anyway, besides the fact that my parents were strict, we were a really close family, and my parents were really very much the center of it. My dad was South African and very dashing. He looked kind of like Sean Connery, and he was a surgeon, and he had been chief of staff at the hospital. And my mom was a character. She spoke Spanish and German fluently, and she was very funny. And we celebrated all the things that families celebrate, holidays and birthdays. And so for my dad's 80th birthday, we all rented a beach house, and it was really fun. My sisters and their husbands and all their kids came, and we all celebrated. And I'm really glad we did, because as it turns out, that was my dad's last birthday, because a few months later, he had a massive stroke and he collapsed on the bathroom floor, and my mom found him. And within a week, he was gone. And we were all just stunned, because he'd been in good health, and it was just a real shock, and especially for my mom. She'd been married since she was 23. They'd been married 47 years. She'd never been alone. She went from being taken care of by her dad to being taken care of by her husband. And she was not handling it well. I mean, to the point where we had to get her some medication to deal with her anxiety and to help her sleep. And we were all shocked, but my mom was really distraught. So my brother and I were trying to help. And we helped her. We went into my dad's office and we thought we'd help clean it out. And I was going through the file cabinet and I came across a manila folder. I don't think it had a label, but I opened it up and I found all these like handwritten letters in my dad's big doctor scrawl, and on just white paper, and they looked like they had been faxed between him and a woman whose name started with a B, which was kind of funny because my dad's name also started with a B. It was Basil. And it turns out that this woman, B, was his daughter from a previous relationship that he had had before he met my mom, when he lived in another country. And he hadn't said anything. And so I showed my brother and we were like, now what do we do? I mean, we knew our mom didn't know. And we knew that because in one of the letters, B had pleaded with my dad to please tell the rest of his family about her. And he had replied and said, you know, I have an ailing mother-in-law and I just can't do that. I can't upset her. I can't tell her. So we knew our mom didn't know. And what were we going to do? So we told our other two sisters about it. And we had all these like conference calls back and forth trying to decide. And one of my sisters, the middle one, thought we should tell mom. But the three of the rest of us thought, we can't do this to her. We can't. She's not in good shape. How can we tell her that someone she was married to for 47 years kept this secret their entire life? So we didn't. We kept his secret. My brother took the folder out of the house, and this woman lived across the country, and we just sort of hoped, I don't know, we hoped that it would go away in a way. We just didn't know what to do. But about a year later, almost a year exactly after my dad died, my mom got a letter from B. And she introduced herself and said who she was and that she wanted to get to know us. And my mom was just devastated. She just was shattered. And then she confronted all four of us. And she said, did you know? And this time we lied. We said, no, we didn't know. Because how could we tell her? So there are a lot of stories here. There's a lot of ways this story could go. But the part that sticks with me the most is the effect that this secret had on my mom. Because after that, she really kind of unraveled. That was in April. And by Thanksgiving, there was this weird sort of situation. She didn't fall or anything, but she broke her hip and she was in the hospital. And while she was in the hospital, she complained of terrible chest pains. And the doctors just sort of chalked it up to grief, and they gave her some pain medicine, and they sent her home with a walker. So at 71, my mom had this walker, and she really wasn't doing well, and she just couldn't really kind of recover. And by St. Patrick's Day, she was in so much agony and pain that she called a neighbor, and he took her to the ER, the emergency room, and they did a scan. And it turned out that she had cancer throughout her whole body. It had metastasized to the bone, which is why her chest hurt so badly. And it was stage 4. And they couldn't figure out really what kind of cancer it was. And they treated her with chemo and radiation, but she couldn't really come back. And I think that secrets have a weight to them. And the secret was heavy on my mom. And by July, she died. And she'd really been in agony, and she had been so tough. She'd had 4 kids with natural childbirth, no drugs, and this was just too much pain for her. And so I know that cancer took her, but I think that this secret that my dad kept took the life out of her. So I am tired of carrying the secret and the weight of it. So the secret is now out. And this summer, my brother and I hope to meet B for the first time. And before telling this story, I checked with all my siblings. And they all said, yes, tell it. Because Mom was right. The truth always comes out.
Robin Meyerowitz, everyone. Thank you, Robin. Thank you for sharing that beautiful memory of both your mother and your father, and reminding us that that's what stories do. Stories help us to process our lives and connect the dots between these things that have happened and make and share the meaning of how we got through and get through these things. So beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to brag about you, just a little one. So Robin just got her first story. Was it your first story published?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. So Robin just got a story published. Woohoo! That is another personal essay that she did. So you can look. Where can we find it? Can you let
The
us know?
Sunlight Press.
The Sunlight Press. So check it out. It's another delightful, wonderful story
That I told originally in your class, Corey.
that she told in this class. So before our last storyteller, that's maybe a good opportunity to plug. Like, if this looks like fun, it is. And you get to basically do the same thing, like come up with stories, develop them, work on them, and who knows, maybe you can publish them like Robin. Okay, we have one more storyteller. Let me find you, Anita, and promote you. And please welcome to the stage your last storyteller for the night, Anita Cabrera.
But before I go, I want to give a hand to everyone because I was just so touched and honored to be around everyone else. So clap for all the other. So,
Yeah.
you know, I've always wanted to serve on a jury, but I keep getting dismissed because I'm really judgmental. And the first time I was called for a domestic violence case, and before the questioning even began, I just pegged the defendant as guilty, and I was dismissed. The second case was a class action lawsuit against this like multi-million-dollar company for asbestos or something in its building. I was glad I was dismissed. But finally, I was called for this criminal case. And I enjoy a lurid crime story as much as the next person. I'm not embarrassed to say. So when the time came, I didn't mention the fact that in the past I'd written for a legal newspaper. And I didn't mention that I regularly invited former felons, cops, and prison reform advocates to come to my classes. I just said I was an English teacher. And truth be told, I don't know how effective an English teacher I am. But the one thing that I try to impress on my students every single semester is the importance of understanding other perspectives. And for this reason, every single time I teach a class, we look at this essay by the psychologist Carl Rogers. It's called Communication. It's Blocking and it's Facilitation. And Rogers' thesis in this essay is that the major barrier to all communication is the tendency to judge. He says that as humans, we evaluate before we listen. And that the only way to get over that is to listen with understanding, to put yourself in the place of someone else and try to see their perspective. Anyhow, finally, I made it on a jury and I was really excited. I looked around at, my other jury panel members and we were a great bunch. We had this age range and there's a smattering of color. And I was excited to be doing my civic duty with these folks, And I also had some idea that you're not supposed to wear blue jeans to court. So on the first day of the trial, I wore these crimson red cotton chino pants. And as I'm waiting to go into the courtroom, this other juror walks up and he's wearing crimson red cotton chino shorts, you know? And as he passes by me, he says under his breath, "This jury's not big enough for 2 pairs of red pants." And I thought that was so funny. And it was even more adorable because he happened to have an Australian accent. He was like this young blonde bodybuilder type. Anyway, we were ready to go and I was excited. The first thing we learned about the defendant was that he was 65 years old and he did have a criminal record. You see, many, many decades earlier, he had done time in a federal penitentiary for possession of drugs. It was at a time the sentencing guidelines were very strict. We learned that in the over 25 years since he'd been free, he'd maintained a clean and sober lifestyle. He'd held the same job for over 15 years. He'd married and raised a family. We heard glowing character references from his employers, his church community, and a nonprofit where he volunteered. We learned that his wife had passed right prior to this incident in question. And he had told in a statement, he'd said that he became despondent and depressed when she died. He said that on the night in question, it was the first time in decades that he had used drugs. He bought some crack. Now, witnesses testified that they saw him on one of those little alley streets south of Market. It was close to midnight and he was crouched in like a doorway. And as these witnesses went by, he asked to use their telephone. He said he was scared people were after him. He needed to call the police. Now, of course, they didn't give him their telephone. Shortly thereafter, the defendant started banging on a door. And when nobody answered, he broke into this. It ended up being a residence, an apartment. He broke the lock and he entered. We heard from the victim herself, the woman who lived there. She was this soft-spoken woman with graying hair and excellent posture. She described how she was woken up by the banging and how the defendant entered her house and he asked to use the telephone. And pretty much before she could do anything, she was startled. He found the landline, he picked it up, he dialed 911, and he asked the operator to send the police because people were after him. She also made a point to look at the jury and tell us that the defendant, that she did not want to press charges. She thought that the defendant could maybe get some kind of diversion or counseling. She only asked that the city pay for the broken lock on her door. She said it was the district attorney, the prosecutor, who wanted to press charges. It was a short, simple case. So we were asked to deliberate as a jury to decide whether the defendant was guilty of burglary, which means entering private property with the intent to commit a felony. So the first thing we did was choose a foreman and cast like blind votes, write down what we thought, guilty or not guilty. And this is where I became very confused. You see, we had all listened to the exact same facts, the exact same testimonies, the exact same arguments. No one contested any of that. And yet the foreperson read 11 guilty votes and 1 not guilty. It was me. I'll tell you right now, I'm going to break the suspense. It was me who had said not guilty. So we needed to be unanimous, so we started deliberating. And I explained that I thought it meant a lot that the woman herself who lived in the residence did not want to press charges. And other people came back with, well, he did break in her house. We deliberated, we had another vote, and this time we had 3 not guilty. And one of the people who had voted not guilty was the youngest member of the jury. She was this woman with like purplish red hair, and she had combat, like Doc Martens boots, And she argued that she didn't think that his actions merited sending him back to federal prison because of his past. He would have been looking at a prison sentence. We took another vote and we had 8 not guilty this time. one of the people who was still arguing for the guilty verdict was the Australian. And he was sitting all the way on the other end of this conference table, you know, and he spoke up this time. And he said, you know, if I'm in my home, my house where I live, I deserve the right, I have the right to feel safe. We shouldn't be allowing other people, whether they're high or on drugs or mentally unstable, to just enter our homes. And, you know, we need to feel safe. People shouldn't be able to break in and not suffer any kind of consequences. And he was speaking with such emotion that it made me think about that Carl Rogers essay, because in his essay, Rogers says that listening with understanding is most important when you're in the middle of a heated emotional discussion. And in his essay, he invites you, or any readers, to try this experiment. He calls it an experiment. He says the next time you're having a discussion or misunderstanding, any kind of sort of, you know, argument with somebody, stop what you're doing and repeat what that person says. But you can't just parrot it. Rogers says that you have to try to inhabit their emotional world, to try to feel a situation from their perspective. So I gave it a try. And I looked all across, you know, we were at a long conference table, and I looked right at that Australian fellow. And not that, it's okay if, you know, that he's Australian. I'm not making fun of Australians, but I looked at him and I said, you know, I understand. You're absolutely right. That none of us wants to feel unsafe in our own homes. None of us thinks that it's okay if someone's mentally unstable or high on drugs or for any whatever reason should be able to break a lock, barge in, and possibly harm us or our family. You're absolutely right. We don't want to live in a society like that. And I'm 100% being honest here. I swear to God, I thought I saw his pecs kind of go down and relax for just a little bit. And then I added, but do we want to live in a society where we send a person to prison simply for calling the police and asking for help? Finally, we came back with a unanimous verdict, not guilty. And as I tell you this story, I'm afraid that you're judging me right now. But a lot of you might be thinking, you know, crimson red cotton chino pants are absolutely inappropriate for a courtroom. Or you may be judging me and thinking, oh, this is one of these people who's soft on crime. But you know, I would rather you judge me for being soft on crime than hard on listening. Thank you.
Anita Cabrera, everyone. Okay, Anita was our 8th and final storyteller. Before we do our Q&A, I want to just do some appreciations. I want to thank you, our audience, for coming tonight, for supporting your friends, your family, or complete strangers. Thank you for being here. I want to thank the storytellers, all of our storytellers tonight, for telling just incredible, beautiful stories, and for working so hard throughout this class to really just bring it and work together. Something that was wonderful throughout the class was people helping each other tell their own stories better.
No, but Corey, I want to say that I suggested everybody take the class because there's not real homework. That's good. And a lot of things come up. You start remembering things.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, sharing the stories with each other in the class and kind of developing sort of like, in a weird way, a virtual intimacy between, you know, like the 8 of us. And then, so it was interesting tonight to try it out with a slightly larger audience. But it felt nice to just kind of share and be witnessed.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience. Thank you, storytellers. What a wonderful afternoon. Great experience. I'm going to miss our Thursday nights, but I know you're going to go out there and keep telling great stories. So keep doing it. Spread your stories in the world. A world where people are telling more stories is a world I want to live in. So thank you for going through this all together. And everyone stay safe. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank-